Russia launches another wave of strikes across Ukraine, hitting military, industrial, and logistics targets, as Moscow also reports new gains on the ground. The U.S.-Iran negotiating window expires without a final agreement, while the Strait of Hormuz remains at the center of the confrontation. President Trump orders joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises to be significantly scaled back as Seoul simultaneously pushes for renewed dialogue with Pyongyang. Israel carries out new strikes in southern Lebanon after a Hezbollah drone attack, putting fresh pressure on the framework for withdrawal and disarmament. The Taliban marks 5 years since returning to power in Afghanistan with a military parade in Kabul. Houthi forces fire 6 ballistic missiles at Yemen's Mocha port, halting commercial operations near the Bab el-Mandeb shipping corridor. And in Leaders on X, Israel Katz expands security ties with Honduras, Pope Leo XIV calls for a two-state solution, and Donald Tusk sends emergency support to Hungary. China says an experimental Maglev train has reached around 800 kilometers per hour in a new high-speed test. Russia carried out another series of strikes across Ukraine, hitting military, industrial, and logistics targets in several regions. In the Kirovohrad region, a large fire was reported around Kanatovo airbase after what Russian sources described as missile strikes. In Kryvyi Rih, an industrial facility was hit, while additional strikes were reported around the Kremenchuk refinery and the port area of Odessa. Russian sources also reported attacks on Ukrainian logistics and drone infrastructure. In Kramatorsk, a Geran-2 drone was said to have struck a Nova Poshta cargo facility. In the Kharkiv region, Russia said Su-34 aircraft targeted 2 Ukrainian drone control points near Hryhorivka and Prikolotny using a K-39 missile and FAB-1500 guided bombs. A Tornado S strike was also reported against Ukrainian positions on the Dobropilya axis. On the ground, Russian sources claimed the capture of Novosolovo in the Zaporizhzhia region and Andriivka in the Donetsk region, adding to pressure along several active sectors of the front. Ukraine, meanwhile, continued its long-range strike campaign inside Russia, with several attacks focused on logistics and defense-linked infrastructure. In the Moscow region, a major fire was reported at the Wildberries logistics complex in Kolodino. Ukrainian sources say one of the key buildings was destroyed and another section of the complex was hit. A separate large fire was also reported at the Severny Domodedovo logistics site. Ukraine also confirmed a strike on the Kamensky Combine in Kamensk-Shakhtinsky in Russia's Rostov region. Ukrainian sources say the plant is involved in the production of solid rocket fuel and components used in missile and aviation systems. Satellite imagery circulating after the attack appears to show damage to several structures at the site. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukrainian commanders had reviewed the situation around Kostiantynivka, Sloviansk, and Pokrovsk and updated their assessment of Russian objectives in those sectors. He also said additional resources are being directed toward protecting frontline logistics from Russian drones. Zelensky separately confirmed that Ukraine intends to continue long-range operations. He said priorities for deep strikes have already been set for the coming weeks and for September, reinforcing Kyiv's current strategy of targeting logistics, industrial sites, and military infrastructure deeper inside Russian territory. The 60-day negotiating window between Washington and Tehran has expired with no announced extension and no final agreement. The interim memorandum was meant to open the way to a broader settlement, including limits on further escalation and arrangements for commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, talks have stalled and the strait remains the main point of confrontation. Commercial traffic through Hormuz is still below pre-war levels. Iran continues to assert control over the waterway, while the United States maintains pressure on Iranian ports. Tehran is also discussing possible arrangements with Oman. Tensions rose again after another ADNOC-operated tanker was attacked in the strait, the third such vessel hit within a week. The UAE called on Iran to stop the attacks. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper has visited the USS Abraham Lincoln during a regional tour that also included Bahrain, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The carrier remains one of the main platforms supporting U.S. operations against Iran. Cooper described the deployment as one of the most operationally intense of the modern era. A separate dispute is unfolding between Iran and Qatar. Tehran says Qatar is holding 3 Iranian pilots who disappeared after 2 Iranian Su-24 aircraft were shot down during a March operation involving Al Udeid Air Base. Iran says the pilots have had no contact with their families or Iranian officials and has appealed to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Doha denies holding them, saying search teams recovered the remains of one pilot and that Iran had previously been invited to receive a briefing on the search. Another security concern comes from fitness apps. Publicly available Strava and similar data has revealed movement patterns around sensitive military facilities. Sky News identified more than 1,300 users at American bases, with uploaded routes exposing patrol patterns, unit activity, and movement around sites not shown on public maps. Changes in running activity in Bahrain and Jordan also coincided with troop redeployments ahead of Iranian attacks. Similar leaks were identified at RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus and at other sensitive regional facilities, showing how routine exercise data can expose operational patterns inside restricted bases. The issue has been known since 2018, but the latest findings show that existing restrictions have not eliminated the risk. President Donald Trump has ordered the Pentagon to substantially reduce joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises, saying the drills are too expensive and send what he called an inappropriate and hostile signal to North Korea. In a post, Trump said the decision was also based on what he described as his very good relationship with Kim Jong-un. He argued that North Korea had remained unthreatening and respectful during his presidency and said Washington should not be sending a hostile message through large-scale exercises. Trump said it was already too late to cancel this year's drills completely, so he instructed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to scale them back instead. Ulchi Freedom Shield had already begun. The 11-day exercise involves around 18,000 South Korean troops alongside U.S. forces and includes command post training, live fire drills, maneuver operations, river crossings, and precision targeting. Trump also linked the issue to the war with Iran. In the same post, he said he had recently asked the South Korean president whether Seoul wanted to join the United States in what he called the denuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The answer was, no thanks. That adds another point of friction inside the alliance as Washington continues pressing Seoul to assume a greater share of its own defense burden. At the same time, South Korea is pursuing a diplomatic opening toward Pyongyang. President Lee Jae-myung has proposed talks aimed at formally ending the Korean War, which stopped with an armistice in 1953 rather than a peace treaty. North Korea has not embraced the offer. Pyongyang continues to condemn the joint exercises as preparations for war and has recently resumed ballistic missile launches. Israel has carried out a new wave of airstrikes in southern Lebanon after an explosive Hezbollah drone hit Israeli troops operating inside Lebanese territory. Israel says 3 soldiers were seriously wounded in that attack. The Israeli military says it responded by striking Hezbollah infrastructure in the areas of Ali Taher and Ansar. It later said one of the strikes killed Ali Samir al-Hajj Hassan, described by Israel as a battalion commander in Hezbollah's elite Radwan force. Hezbollah has not confirmed responsibility for the drone attack. The escalation comes despite the framework agreement announced in June. Under that plan, Israeli forces are expected to withdraw from southern Lebanon in exchange for Hezbollah's disarmament. Hezbollah was not a party to the agreement and continues to reject direct talks with Israel. The group has also accused the Lebanese government of making concessions without securing a full Israeli withdrawal. Beirut, meanwhile, has condemned the latest Israeli strikes and says they undermine efforts to stabilize the south. The latest exchange is therefore testing whether the June framework can survive continued military action on the ground. Israel is still targeting Hezbollah positions. Hezbollah remains armed and outside the negotiating process, and the central dispute over withdrawal and disarmament remains unresolved. The Taliban has marked 5 years since returning to power in Afghanistan with a military parade in Kabul, using the anniversary to display captured and newly fielded equipment and to present its rule as consolidated. Taliban forces marched near the former U.S. embassy, while officials framed the event as a symbol of the end of the Western-backed government and the withdrawal of U.S. and allied forces in August 2021. 5 years on, the movement remains internationally isolated. Russia is the only country to have formally recognized the Taliban government, while most other states maintain contacts without granting full diplomatic recognition. The main obstacle remains the Taliban's treatment of women and girls. Girls are still barred from secondary education, women are excluded from universities and many government jobs, and restrictions on public life remain in force. At the same time, the Taliban has expanded political and economic contacts with neighboring states, including Iran and Pakistan, while trying to attract investment and normalize relations without changing its core domestic policies. The anniversary therefore highlights the contradiction of Taliban rule. The movement controls Afghanistan Pakistan and has built working relations with regional powers, but broader recognition remains blocked by the same internal policies that have defined its government since taking Kabul. Houthi forces have launched a new missile attack on Yemen's port of Mocha, widening the latest escalation near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Yemeni authorities say 6 ballistic missiles were fired at the port. The attack damaged infrastructure, set small vessels on fire, and forced commercial operations to stop. Government forces also reported additional Houthi missile activity in the area in recent days. The Houthis say their operations target military positions, weapons facilities, and Saudi-backed forces along Yemen's western coast. Mocha lies close to Bab el-Mandeb, the narrow passage linking the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aden. Traffic through the corridor has already fallen as security conditions worsen and more ships avoid the route. With the Strait of Hormuz also disrupted, renewed attacks around Bab el-Mandeb are putting pressure on a second major trade corridor. Ships diverting around Africa face longer voyages, higher fuel use, and rising insurance costs. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says Israel and Honduras have signed a memorandum to significantly expand security cooperation. Katz said the agreement reflects Israel's broader effort to deepen security partnerships with countries around the world. Pope Leo XIV has called for an end to repeated violence against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. He urged the international community to move forward with implementation of a two-state solution, saying political action is needed to prevent further escalation and create conditions for Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace and security. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says Warsaw has dispatched a special government aircraft to Hungary following the crash involving a Polish bus. The plane is carrying medical personnel, psychologists, and consular officials. Tusk said Polish authorities are coordinating with Hungarian services to provide assistance and organize the return of those affected. Chinese researchers have pushed an experimental Maglev vehicle to 800 km per hour on a 1-kilometer test track in Hubei province. The 1.1-ton model accelerated to its top speed in just 5.3 seconds, reaching the mark after roughly 600 meters. The entire run, including a controlled stop, lasted about 8 seconds. The system combines permanent magnet-electric suspension with electromagnetic propulsion, allowing the vehicle to travel without direct wheel-to-rail contact. Researchers say the test also validated high-speed stability, low-latency communications, and precise linear motor control. Eastlake Laboratory says this is its third speed record in 6 months, following earlier runs at 650 and 700 km per hour. The test line will now support research into next-generation maglev transport and other electromagnetic launch technologies.